Welcome to Ireland Unfiltered. This week's guest is Mairead McGuinness. Mairead is Vice President of the European Parliament and one of the most articulate voices on Brexit across the continent. She's become a regular on Question Time on the BBC, talking sense to Brexiteers, and she is a fascinating woman with an incredible story. And we talked an awful lot about that. We recorded this interview on Good Friday, a few hours after the news about the murder of Lyra McKee came out, and we started by talking about that horrific murder and what it means for Northern Ireland. Mairead McGuinness, welcome to Ireland Unfiltered. We're sitting here on a gorgeous afternoon in Dublin on Good Friday, but it's been a bad day for Ireland. Can you tell us about how you feel when you heard the news about Lyra McKee?
Well, like lots of people, I always reach for my phone first thing in the morning to see what's happened. And honest to God, it was absolutely shocking when I read that this wonderful young journalist, and we know more about her now because of her terrible murder, but that she was literally shot doing her job. And it speaks to two things. First of all, that the problems of Northern Ireland are greater than people, perhaps in the House of Commons, understand, the tensions in communities. But secondly, that many journalists get killed in the line of duty. Lyra is, I suppose, a real shock to us because of her commitment to peace. As we say, we're learning more about her. But the fact that she was out covering a riot and was in the line of fire and the bullets took her out. And I mean, it's Good Friday, and in a way it makes it even worse to think that we're going into the Easter period and this young woman has been murdered. Across Europe, journalists have been murdered as well. And I hope to God that people who are a little bit indifferent about the peace process and the Good Friday Agreement will actually gather themselves together. And I would say that to Sinn Féin and the DUP. And everyone shares a responsibility here, because in the absence of any political body to get talks going, you're going to get groups that will do this type of thing. And the fact that there are guns in communities is quite shocking when we thought that guns were a thing of the past. So it's more than a wake-up call, but the fact that a woman has to lose her life, a journalist, for us to all take stock, I'm just appalled by it. And I cannot imagine how her family, her friends, her journalists, colleagues and community must be feeling now. And sometimes in the aftermath, immediately, we say all these wonderful words, and I'm adding to it now, but the shock will resonate, in weeks to come and in months to come, when they realise that, she went out to do her job and she didn't come back. And nobody would have anticipated that could happen in Ireland after the peace process, after our decades of relative peace, some instability. But it definitely is a shock in this Easter weekend, and the sun is shining and the world looks good, but it's not. There's a lot of badness going on in Northern Ireland and indeed in many other countries. And
you talk about the need for Sinn Féin and DUP to do something like that. Is that being exploited by these groups at the moment, the inaction?
Well, I think if you have a political vacuum, which we have, because there isn't anyone sitting down talking to each other, then other things happen in communities. And I've been very conscious, because I represent border counties in the European Parliament. I'm conscious from my contacts on the ground, north and south of this invisible border, that there are tensions creeping back in. So in the absence of dialogue, you get other things. We have to remember that the peace process and what led to it is relatively new, and that not everyone bought into it, and that some don't even remember the troubles of the past. Like my own children would not have had the memory that I do. And because I have that memory, it put the shivers down my spine that we could very easily let the peace slip away, because all it takes is for a retaliation or another group from another side to do worse or do the same for things to disintegrate again. And when you're trying to build communities that have for decades been divided, let's be frank about it, and an awful history, which we have to respect, that long history, for civil rights and all that went with it. Politics has to take responsibility to some extent. And I know they will say, those two parties, that they cannot sit down now, but they've left it very long. And even if you take the whole Brexit saga in the mix of all this, Northern Ireland has not had a voice. And I have brought many groups from Northern Ireland to meet the Barnier team and others to talk about Brexit, because they don't have an assembly. They have no place to vent, if you like, frustrations and anger. And whatever, people give out about democracies and parliaments, and probably give out about the European Parliament and Dáil Éireann, at least it's a place where you get issues aired and people can battle with words. The biggest fear I have, and it's increasingly a global thing, that people will begin to battle with weapons again. And we saw the worst effects of that last night at a riot in Derry.
And a friend of hers was on the BBC this morning, and she said, do people even think about us over here? And it registered with the interviewer who said, tell us about it. And do you think that's something, again, that has been ignored for too long?
Well, I think for all of us, you know, we have to be conscious. I grew up in County Louth, so I remember lots of incidents that happened on the border, further inland in Northern Ireland, and impacted in the south as well. And I'm very conscious, and I mentioned that my children have no memory of that. And there's always a danger, if your memory is not complete, that you allow things slip. And that you have by accident these divisions reappearing. So I think we all need to wise up now. I know that Simon Coveney, the Taoiseach, has really worked hard to try and help this process in Northern Ireland. I think the British Prime Minister has certainly said fine words about Northern Ireland and the peace process and her commitment to it. But I think we need more now. We need more action. We need a proper response to what happened in Derry, because it will not go away unless there is a proper political response to it. And I'd imagine there are families now up there terribly worried about their children and what could happen. Could they also be brought in to this type of situation where there's an angry reaction, people who haven't accepted the Good Friday Agreement and all that it entails, and who are striking out again? So I think a lot of people should go into this Easter weekend with heavy hearts. I mean, I was devastated when I heard it. And I actually thought, well, at least the American delegation of politicians led by Nancy Pelosi, I think they're still in Northern Ireland in an awful way. I just said, well, at least now they know that what we're saying is now coming to pass in the worst possible way, and that they will take a message to their own houses of representatives and the Senate in the US, but also talk to their counterparts in the UK, and certainly for my EU colleagues, and I will talk to them about this. This has to be a big issue for us, because Europe supported the peace process. And I think what's intriguing, and I've just been learning about that from politicians who've been in the European Parliament for a long time, you know, John Hume, Ian Paisley could have a coffee in Strasbourg at the European Parliament, where they mightn't have been able to find that space where they could sit down and have a coffee in Northern Ireland. So a lot of my colleagues have a deep conviction and commitment to peace in Northern Ireland. And I had a really interesting experience when the Austrians had the presidency last time round, and I was in Vienna, and the two politicians at the table had been to Northern Ireland as young students, as part of the peace movement. And it was more than I had done. And I just thought that we don't give credit to the fact that many European politicians grew up in their youth organisations, understanding Northern Ireland and being active in trying to support peace. So I hope that out of this horrific murder, that it will waken up politics again, because in the absence of politics, you'll get all sorts of people taking back control, using weapons to do that, and that's a very slippery slope.
We'll come back to Brexit later too, maybe, but take me back, you talked about it there, to when you were growing up. You were born in Ardee.
Excuse me, I'm from Ardee in County Louth.
And you were the fifth of...
I'm the fifth from the top, and there's three more after me. And I always tell a funny story about that, which my parents are now passed away, and they were wonderful people. But our house burnt down after I was born. So we had a long thatched farmhouse. Apparently it was beautiful. We have one photograph of it left. I didn't do the burning, by the way. It was just a coincidence that I was the last in the pram. There was a gas explosion and the place was destroyed. And then there was a little gap. We lived in the cow house. They converted the cow shed to, which is still there. And we lived in that. I have no memory of that, but we all survived it. But there was a bit of a gap, and then there were three more children, because obviously the cow house wasn't comfortable. But yeah, there's 8 of us. So
you were the fifth. You were the youngest for a while then, were you?
Yeah, but not for long, but a while. Yeah, a bit of a tomboy, because I came after my older sister, 3 boys, myself. So I would have been, more the tomboy. I didn't particularly like housework, which we all had to do a bit of. I liked the outdoors.
And your father was a farmer?
He was a farmer, very modest, very quiet man, very, very bright man, got a scholarship to go on to study and chose to stay at home and do market gardening. My mother didn't get the chance of an education and would have loved it. And that's why I think she drove us all to make sure that we had an education. But anyone from Dundalk would remember, we used to supply fresh strawberries and raspberries and gooseberries to Donnelly's. It was a fruit literally shop on the square in Dundalk, and that was a time when people ate seasonal fruits. So we would go maybe twice a day with freshly picked fruit I was just thinking about this, no plastic. It was in lovely thin wooden punnets, as we used to call them. I'm really aging myself, but I think we're going to go back there anyway, because we'll have to. So we were very much market gardeners. My father got into dairying in the 60s, and then the whole European thing happened. So they were very entrepreneurial, but I suppose we were the workforce. There was 8 of us, so it was like all hands on deck.
But you loved hard work.
Yeah, and in a way I wonder, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Right.
I come from that stock.
Yeah.
I mean, both my parents would have, I mean, if you were idle, they would say, what are you doing? They'd find a job for you. And I'm afraid I've inherited that. So my children are very happy that I'm not there during the week to give them jobs to do, that their father is there and he's calmer. But no, my parents had a great strong work ethic. And I suppose they had to have, they'd 8 children. They needed to, fund us all and whatever we had to do. And we all have that. And sometimes we kind of say, maybe it'd been better if we were lazy. If we hadn't that work ethic, because you drive yourself a bit too hard. And it is something that I'm conscious of. Sometimes you can overdo it.
Yeah.
That you're only human and you have to pull the reins back a little bit. So I try and do that.
Have you become more conscious of that?
I think I have, yeah. I tell you, and it's mixed up in my head with, I think women are a bit like that. We're doing loads of things. And when you're doing loads of things, people say, aren't you great, you're doing all that? But then you're overlooked. Yeah. So sometimes I think we have to be a bit more strategic. Not to be doing loads of things, but doing some things and pulling back from doing others. Now, as I say, I'm guilty with my own children. I mean, and they're very good. They're very self-motivated because I haven't been around to do that in terms of study or whatever. But they would be good workers. Yeah. But they look at me and I think they say, no, not doing what she does.
Right.
They think I'm a bit crazy.
And you were aware, you said once that the issue of gender was always something that you were aware of, even when you were quite young.
Yeah, I was. And those of us who are old enough to remember Gay Byrne on the Late Late Show, that was in Ireland. When I was a teenager, the issues that we now don't even talk about anymore were big unfolding issues, and gender equality was one of them. So when I was 17, I believed that women were going to make it into all sorts of positions everywhere. Yeah. I'm now not that anymore. I'm a good bit further down the line, and it hasn't happened. And it's amazing that we're still talking about this after so much that has changed, but so much has not changed. So I was kind of conscious of that, and I think my mother was also very conscious of it. So her name and my father's name was on the checkbook. There was no sense of he's the boss and she's not. And when anyone came to the door looking for the boss, she'd say, here I am. So I think it was in all of us, both my brothers and my sisters, that notion of equality. Even though for women there are different issues that arise, particularly around children.
And why do you think it hasn't changed, if you thought it was almost inevitable then?
I don't know. I suppose because in my innocence when I was 17, I didn't think you had to do anything proactive. I thought it would generically change. Right. So I imagine at 17 I wouldn't have agreed with gender quotas in politics. But now I'm wiser and I realise that sometimes you need to kickstart a development in order for it to actually begin, and then it will take its own course. So I think it's because it's very hard to change attitudes. It's hard to change the way things are. Yeah. And there are, I suppose, reasons too why we shouldn't want everybody to want the same thing, but that everybody has the chance if they want to do something, that whether you're a man or a woman, you have that chance, that your gender doesn't stop you getting stuck in. And I suppose in our house there were no jobs for the girls or boys, there were jobs to be done, and we all kind of did get stuck into it. But I have, I suppose, become more conscious of it. Even in the European Parliament, in our own political group, we now have a situation where on the bureau of the group we have equal representation, but that took a deliberate policy change. And in the European Parliament we are conscious when we're doing appointments to various levels in the administration that we are trying to encourage and promote women into those positions, because what you see is what you get. So if you don't see women in these positions, you're not going to see great change. One of the things that's fascinating, and I was in journalism for a long time, and I've never understood why, but when I was doing photographs for the Farming Indo or the Farmers Journal, or even for Ear to the Ground when we were filming, I never had a problem getting men to stand into photographs, ever. Amazing. Yeah. They were always there, and rightly so. Yeah. But I had a real problem getting women to do it. And the number of women who would say, oh, it doesn't matter if you don't see me, and literally slump into the background. And I'd say, actually, it does matter, and we do need to see you. And I had a great group over from a college in the constituency recently, really great group. And there was women doing the same. And I think they thought I was a bit of a bossy one at the beginning. But at the end of the day, one of them came up to me and she said, you were absolutely right. She said, I've just thought about what you said because I tend not to stand into pictures and now I'm going to do it. So it's small things like that that do make a difference.
Whereas men will get into any picture.
Well, I suppose, you see, on the balance of probability, there tends to be more men in those areas where you're taking photographs of them. I mean, I've always worked in areas where there was more men than women. So when I was going to farmers' meetings, there might be a few women, and this is going back to the 80s, right into the 90s, but they would be uniquely the few. I think it's interesting now that farm organisations, including the IFA and others, are talking about diversity in their organisation. We also have an interesting development, and it's great to see it, that women who are farming have actually come together in their own groups, because obviously they want to kind of promote things that they're interested in, and they're finding their own voice. So there are things happening now which are to the good. But I suppose I was conscious of it, and I would have... Look, in our house there was 11 around the table because my Uncle Paddy lived with us virtually and ate all his meals with us, and we debated and we talked. That was when people used to sit at a table and eat, which is also very quaint, and there's no pictures of it, but we'd have had good chats around the table.
And was it a political family?
My father would have been involved in Fine Gael at a very, grassroots level. I think he might have been treasurer or something in RD. But then when he had loads of kids, I think that dwindled off a little bit. But we were political in the sense of my mother had a great social conscience. She would have done enormous work with the travelling community, who were our neighbours on our road in the Glebe RD. They always lived on our road. And I suppose I was always conscious too, when we were children walking home from school, because we did at that time walk, which was also quite unique, or cycle. And I used to notice the poverty in the tarpaulin tents. You'd see the rats, you'd see the muck, you'd see the horses. Now, things have changed visibly, perhaps, but a lot hasn't changed. So my mother had great friendships with traveller families, and they would come back to see her, and they'd bring their children and the grandchildren. And she worked with a lot of people in Louth to try and do great things. Now, she never talked about it, which is why I am, because she did stuff that... was unique at its time, was groundbreaking. And she did an awful lot of good things. She delivered a baby once in one of those awful tarpaulin tents. She was very frightened. The mother was very frightened, but thank God the baby was well. So she had a great social conscience. And I think that she never sat us down and preached, but it kind of dripped into our heads,
And talk to me a bit about when the Troubles started then, what you remember. You touched on it earlier, but did that change a lot for you as a family, as a farming community?
Well, I think we just were always so aware of what was going on, just literally over the road from us. And I did remember thinking, and I don't know what age I would have been, I used to think, are we doing enough? I mean, I was politically aware enough to think that, the civil rights and all of those sorts of things, and the discrimination and whatever, did we do enough to help people at the time? And I think even the Taoiseach recently, in all of the Brexit stuff, is saying that, we won't be leaving people behind this time because it would be so wrong. So I was very conscious of, I can recall bombings and murders and shootings. And then you were kind of thinking, but we're just getting on with it. Yeah. I found that difficult, but could do nothing about it. We were just conscious of it. And I remember, of course, I went to the Mercy Nuns for part of my education, and they'd be praying for peace, of course, and sometimes you wonder, my God, a lot of prayers weren't heard because for a long time awful things happened. And yet, and I kind of need to say it because I do a lot of the work on religious dialogue in the Parliament, but for the voice and the silence of some in the religious communities, both Protestant and Catholic, I don't think we'd have peace at all. So people did great stuff in churches to try and rebuild, but it was a very dark time. I mean, it was a horrible time, and that's why the Good Friday Agreement and the peace it brought, I think we've taken it for granted. And I think that's really dangerous, really dangerous. I get emails from that quiet centre that don't ring Joe Duffy or don't go on headlines. And the pleading I get is, please keep talking, reminding people and telling them that while things are better, it's not fixed, so that the generations, it will take, I think, more generations to sort out, because you have to acknowledge the legacy and the hurt. And the pain that a lot of people still feel, and many of them have come to the European Parliament, and when you're listening to their stories, you just think, my God, it's going to take a lot for them to be generous to even forgive, and I don't think people will ever forget.
But has enough been done to help that process? We had Jarlath Burns on the show here, who's the former Armagh footballer and GAA man, and he's a school principal, and he was on the Eames Commission, and he talked about how that altered his mindset in so many ways, coming from a South Armagh nationalist background, and this idea of reconciliation and seeing how the other people felt.
Yeah.
And Jarlath's doing incredible work on that in his school and around the place. But a lot of that, there's been peace, but has there been enough reconciliation?
No, and I actually think that I could do more, but it's just you've other things. It's the prioritisation of things. I do think that Brexit really brought me closer to all of this again, because of the fact that I was hearing from particularly young groups in North and South who had come together. And when you heard their stories and their families' stories and what they had gone through, I think that you can't carpet over that.
Yeah.
I think you have to let people talk, and you have to find forgiveness. People have to find forgiveness in their own hearts. I would find it very hard to forgive somebody if they'd murder or hurt anyone belonging to me. I think it takes a very brave person to do that. And yet we do hear extraordinary stories where people have said, I forgive, which I think is a very big thing. But I don't think, I think the healing is not at all even begun properly in communities in Northern Ireland. And I think the fact that they don't have representation is part of that problem, because there's been a whole big vacuum now where nothing has happened. And again, when I hear directly from people and their stories, we have to do more, and we should do more. And that's why the interest and engagement of our European colleagues is really important, because sometimes, to our shame, they have actually done more, perhaps, and are really passionate about peace, because Europe is a peace project. I mean, people talk about the economics of it and all that sort of stuff, but actually the reason we're around the table is that we mightn't all love each other all the time, but the fact that we're at the table means we can talk it out. And try and resolve it. And that is the only way that I can describe the European Union. Keep us together around a table, because when you have one or two shooting off in a different, forgive that expression, but going off in a different direction, and then arguing outside the door, that leads to other terrible movements. And we're seeing all sorts of things around Europe at the moment which are a bit troubling.
Well, and the nationalism in wherever it is, and the EU was a kind of the antidote to extreme nationalism. It is.
It wasn't excluding people having a national identity. I mean, not at all. But it was kind of saying that, look, sometimes it's better that we, if you like, go through all of this stuff at a table. Or even around the coffee. Sometimes it's the informal contacts that are the most important. I mentioned the John Hume, Ian Paisley thing, that you can do an awful lot if you meet somebody in a lift, for example, because you're trapped, first of all. But you can say stuff there that actually helps. But you can also say things that do damage. And I suppose it's the language of moderation is now, people are bored by it. People like extreme language. And social media needs it, which is the shocking reality, because those who have it get the promotion. I mean, even the European Parliament chamber is now sometimes a YouTube studio where people are aware that if I say something really dramatic, well, hey, I'm out there and I'm going to get whatever million hits.
Talk to me a little bit about that, because I know you've done a lot of work with Jim Nicholson.
I mean, I would have known Jim Nicholson before I got involved in politics, just to see and aware that he's a politician.
He's a unionist politician.
Unionist politician, a long time in the Parliament, works on the Agriculture Committee, quite wise around the whole piece and the history. Still a unionist and would have issues with the withdrawal agreement, but at least a person you could chat to and reason with. And to some extent, he's leaving anyway. He was retiring from the Parliament. But I often think you need people with a memory. You need historical memory to be part of the conversation. And the worry would be that we won't have those who've lived through it, who might have actually in that journey twisted and turned and found a different direction and were able to talk about it, like Martin McGuinness. I mean, I have tremendous respect for what he did in terms of the journey he was on and how, in fact, himself and Arlene Foster, if you recall, after Brexit, wrote a very strong letter warning about the dangers to the peace process because of Brexit. So you need people with a memory to keep us on the straight and narrow. If you don't, then you're kind of, it's clinical. It's like, oh yeah, that was then, this is now. But it's never, I think the past, between the past and the future, is very rugged and rough. And you need people to connect. And so therefore you do need people who've been in politics a while, like the Jim Nicholson and others who who kind of will recall quietly but effectively how things were and warn about how things might be. And we've had a few very strong speeches in the Parliament. Richard Ashworth, a Conservative MEP who is a Remainer and is very upset by what has happened. I mean, his last speech in Parliament was profound, and he got a standing ovation, and he hadn't written it down because he was just saying, be careful what's happening in the United Kingdom, which is a divided society, a divided Parliament, who knows what next, can resonate in other places, and don't underestimate the importance of peace, which Europe has delivered for us.
And it's a message that, again, it's resonating in Northern Ireland in its own way. Like you see these offshoots, extreme nationalism, which is a reaction to Brexit, and all these nationalist forces, they collide against each other.
They do, but who would have thought, you see, the tragedy of Brexit, and I suppose we're talking in the context of Northern Ireland, is that during the referendum, nobody mentioned it. Enda Kenny, the former Taoiseach, did. He knew, because again, he had memory. He had, a connection with the past, and he warned about it, and nobody listened. And the people of Northern Ireland voted to remain in the European Union. I expect because they understood it themselves, because they've lived it. And now we have a division where one of the parties, the DUP in Northern Ireland, are with the Conservatives, and therefore more powerful than they might otherwise be, and they're not representing the entirety of the voice from Northern Ireland. So I don't think you could have written a story about a referendum called by a Prime Minister who wouldn't last long afterwards to heal a rift in his own party, which has now had such a rotten rippling effect, not just in the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland, but right across the European Union. Because while it's very prominent for us, it has different effects in other countries. And what's troubling me a little is, and it's coming in here in Ireland as well, people are saying to me, look, let them go. This has gone on too long. The uncertainty is crippling all of us. And I think we just need to be careful not to let that narrative gain ground, because we do have to be patient. We have to be tolerant. We have to hope that come October there will be a resolution. Although most people are saying they do not expect this to be resolved by October, which means we might be into year 4 almost, which is actually unthinkable.
Do you think there's a danger when you hear that stuff, let them go, and there's an understandable frustration with what Brexit has done and what Brexit is doing in Ireland, not just to Northern Ireland, but to what it could do, a no deal could do economically. But is there a danger that there is a kind of a minor version of, we don't need them? The way the Brexiteers thought about Europe, and Irish people will go, forget the close relationship we have with England, which is an important and mutually beneficial relationship these days. And it would be as short-sighted of Irish people to forget about that as it would be of the Brexiteers to forget about Europe.
No, actually, I think Irish people are much more tuned in politically, so they get the whole relationship thing and the history and the friendship and all that. I mean, friendships can be strained, and I think they're a little bit strained at the moment. The reason people are saying, just let they've got to go, is that there is a sense in which we have talked about this for so long, that for businesses they are investing in contingency plans and they're not sure if they're the right plans. They're also not investing because they don't know what the outcome will be, and people want certainty. So I've been surprised that people are saying that. Colleagues in the Parliament are saying it as well. There is a danger in that too, and I think the guy who pulls us back from that danger is the wisdom of Donald Tusk. He's president of the European Council. He was in chamber this week, and I was chairing the debate, and he speaks slowly and not much emotion in it, but by gosh, you'd pick every word and you'd use them, because he is saying to us to be very conscious of the fact that the UK are still full members of the European Union. They enjoy the full rights, and they have to do all their responsibilities to Europe. And we shouldn't try and do anything to force their political, if you like, mind to come to a decision. But there's no doubt there is a bit of frustration, even in my colleagues who are standing for election, because the UK are going to have European Parliament elections, which is unthinkable, but it is true. And a lot of my colleagues in the Parliament are saying, but how can you have members elected who are going to leave? But sometimes that is just how the legal order and the political order is. So I don't think it's a sense in which we don't need the United Kingdom, because that's not true. I think Europe does need the United Kingdom to stay close to us. Ireland certainly needs the United Kingdom, and if you look at our farming and food industry, we feed the United Kingdom. They love our cheddar cheese in huge volumes, and long may it continue. Equally our beef. But already there has been a Brexit impact, and beef companies might be thinking of processing more in the United Kingdom than in Ireland. So there's a lot of worry around that. And I think people, I suppose, are saying, God, we'd like to know one way or the other what's going to happen. But since the referendum, which I knew would not be successful, I knew people would vote to leave.
Did you?
Oh, I did. Oh my God, yeah.
When did you realise that?
I knew from the very get-go.
Right.
Because if you look at the history of coverage of European Union in the United Kingdom, Straight Banana Brigade, the Looney Bin, the Brussels Bubble, I'm one of the Brussels elites, by the way. I'm a bureaucrat. I didn't know, but apparently I am. And given my background, I'm certainly not elite, but I'm painted into that big corner. So how could anyone persuade people on an economic and unemotional level to stay in Europe? David Cameron had a crisp white shirt on, went into factories, said it. I don't think he believed it. The Brexiteers went in with passion, convinced people that black was white and that the world would change for the better once they left the European Union. Who wouldn't believe it? It was such a fantastic story.
But it was such a stupid question to ask as well, wasn't it? It just ignored the realities of 45 years. I think it was Geoffrey Cox said this the other week, that it ignored 45 years of integration. Yeah. People didn't realise how hard it was going to be. They thought you could just make a clean break.
Well, you see, because it was a simple question.
Yeah.
I mean, why? I don't think you can blame people for thinking that.
I think the question was stupid.
I could kick the politicians in a way, metaphorically, because I think, why would you do that without saying, well, actually, before you do it, say, what question should we ask?
Yeah.
What should the majority be if it is to pass or not? What information are we going to give to people so that they can make an informed choice? We do referendum here more frequently than they do in the United Kingdom. And the people have given us a kicking or two when they thought, well, you haven't told us enough about this. We're not going with you on it. Tell us more and maybe we look again. We are perhaps brave and courageous to do it. I think in the United Kingdom, there's a stoicism that says, even if we voted this way and people are telling us it's not good for us, we've made that decision and we will put our chests out and go forward. But there's also, and we shouldn't dismiss it, there is also a genuine apprehension about Europe, a fear of the Brussels bubble and the elite, because a lot of politicians in the United Kingdom never said that they were part of the process. All of the ministers would have been part of every single council meeting, from environment to agriculture to all of these issues, transport, they were present. And there's a lot of MEPs from the United Kingdom who didn't get much oxygen in their own media. So a lot of people in the UK wouldn't know their own MEPs, which is probably not fully true of Ireland. No. I think they might know all of us, but I think there's a more connection.
And there was Alistair Campbell was on this show, and he said that when he was in Tony Blair's government, he said he didn't really enjoy the EU summits because he found that kind of elite thing. He did sort of detect that a bit, and he's become more of a. It was almost the referendum itself that kind of made him realize how important it was, because I think even politicians like that, they always had to kind of have a bit of skepticism.
Well, you see, because they fed that market. That's where they were coming from. And I think the engagement of the United Kingdom with Europe was more about the market and the money and the opportunities for business than it was about an emotional attachment. And in Ireland, I think our emotional attachment was also, if you like, flavoured by the benefits we were getting from the European Union. I think because of Brexit, the word solidarity, which isn't a word we'd use much in Ireland, is now being used more frequently because we're now understanding the importance of it. So yes, I think Alistair Campbell, you see, the trouble about being in and I'm part of that, if you like, circle. I mean, I didn't think I ever would be, because of my own background, and I was in journalism for a long time. I took a rush of blood to the head and I ran for the European Parliament in 2004. I nearly crashed physically and mentally when I declared, because I had no idea of how different it is on the other side of the microphone and how tough it is and how everything becomes, your words are, and rightly so, questioned and scrutinised, and you begin to doubt yourself and what you believe in. But I'm now part of that, and what I try to do in my job is make sure people realise that I live in Ireland. I live on a farm. I have not changed at all, other than I've aged considerably. That I'm a normal human being who has all the challenges of when my parents were ill and all of that that goes on. My mother-in-law is alive and well and lives on the farm with us. My kids have all the worries of college and all that goes with it. And I go into schools a lot. Primary schools are the best. The wisdom of 5-year-olds is just fantastic. And secondary schools, we have a programme which I would have pushed, the Ambassador School programme, which gets students into the whole European thing. Yeah. And they ask us hard questions. And I mean, that's really important. It's to normalise the political stuff that's in Europe. And we need parliaments, including the Dáil, to also normalise this, not to kind of blame Brussels for things that they actually were part of themselves. And that's one of the jobs I have as Vice President, is this dialogue with national parliaments. But it is easy to see why people think that we're removed from or not connected with. But nothing could be further from the truth, because, before I came here, I made some calls about very fundamental issues for individuals that are actually of the member states' duty, but I will deal with those because that grounds you. Yeah. That keeps you kind of close to where people are at. And they go from, the important things around housing, social welfare. I mean, I had a gentleman whose operation was cancelled, so I have to try and help on those levels. And we do that. I think we do that in Ireland because we are directly elected by people. And when you're out canvassing, and I was in Mullingar recently canvassing, they were worried there about the new system of traffic flow and roadworks and stuff like that. That's what people care about. And then we try and bring what we do close to those issues because they are all interlinked. Yeah. But I don't know whether it is that there's so much information today and there's so much ways of people keeping in contact that we're not actually hearing each other. Sometimes when you've too much, you don't hear anything. It's like noise. And that's why very often when my head is buzzed out with all this sort of stuff, I go into a field with the dog and commune with nature.
But how is it that you have managed to sort of penetrate in, say, the British media, like unlike some of their own MEPs? Like you've been on Question Time, and each time you go on, you get a huge reaction, not just from people here, but from the sort of Remain constituency in the UK. Like, why do you think you've been able to do that and their own MEPs are less successful?
I don't actually know why. I mean, I've been on Question Time 3 times, which is, as I said, some of the British MEPs that I'm friendly with just say, how on earth? And I said, well, they phoned me. I didn't phone them. Yeah. On the other hand, I was glad of the opportunity because in a way I was able to be there with, I mean, it is their issue, but I wanted them to know that it's ours too and why it impacts on us. And I've had a very strong reaction, obviously, from people in the United Kingdom who voted Remain, but I've had a strong reaction from people who voted Leave. And they've been, sort of 2 levels of reaction. One where they want me to just, shut up and go away, politely. And there's others who say, actually, I've listened to the way you've reasoned and I've respected the way you've argued and I'm actually changing my mind. Yeah. And if I've managed to help talk through these things, that's no bad thing. But I can't understand why more British MEPs have not got more like Newsnight or Question Time or all the BBC programmes that I would have participated in. But I think what's been very important for me, including with CNN and these channels, that it's important that we're a small nation, that those of us who have an opportunity use our voice and not to roar and shout and scream, but to reason and to challenge some of the questions. Because I've been fascinated at, and I was a journalist myself and probably guilty, so hands up, where I wasn't fully in tune with the issue I might have been asking somebody about. And I found that a lot with European issues, that some of the people asking the questions weren't as tuned in perhaps as I thought they might be. And you can gently then help to inform the debate. But also what I was very conscious of, that there was an attempt in British political circles to paint Ireland as the problem. Yeah. And I could see that narrative because journalists pick this up. You get briefings, everybody in journalism. It's a small circle. And I was challenging that at every moment. And I think programmes like Channel 4, their news is quite a solid. They do their thinking. I was able to say, well, actually, yes, of course, the question of Ireland is a big issue. But the withdrawal agreement was not rejected outright in the House of Commons because of the Irish issue. It was one issue. Remember that people rejected it from the Brexit side of the House and the Remain side. And that is the problem for us, that how do you have this alliance of people who wouldn't even walk the same side of the street voting in the same way because they're passionate for different reasons about this issue. So when I've been on British media, and that's why I've done a lot of it, is because I think it's important that we do get a chance to talk about European and Parliament stuff, but also about how it connects here in Ireland, and been able to get rid of some of the myths that are out there. And I've also done a lot of work that isn't public with a lot of British politicians.
Would you be interested in going over there during the Euro campaign?
Well, I mean, I've my own battle to fight here because Midlands Northwest is a big constituency. So I'm conscious that Irish people want you on the ground and canvassing, and I'm going to be hitting the road and have done a lot already. But I have been asked already to try and help in the campaign of some of my friends that are running for the Parliament in the United Kingdom. I think if it's appropriate, I'd do it. I'm always conscious, though, that it isn't. I shouldn't impose myself. And I remember the first time I was on Question Time, I mean, I went into the Lion's Den, really, and Dimbleby is no mean kind of presenter. He's very tough and very strong. And I actually said it. I said, I was a bit reluctant coming here. And it was lovely. I got a lovely reaction through Twitter and Facebook and those myriad of other ways you get messages. And people were glad that I came and spoke as I did, and that I hadn't horns, that I was
from
the European
concerned?
Union. Because remember, a live audience, why would I be concerned? A live audience, you don't know where they're at, you don't know what can be hurled at you. I like the cut and thrust of broadcasting because I was in it myself for a long time, but it also is very unpredictable. And I was also conscious that, they have elected their own politicians, that I couldn't be there telling them what I thought they should do. But what I was there trying to say, well, because you've made your decision, here's the consequences, not just for yourselves, but for us. And one of the things, and I still haven't got my head around it, and somebody has to do a PhD in this. If I had time, I would myself. What has happened in the British psyche? That a great nation, because they are, and they're big, and they're powerful, and they're strong, and large population, suddenly are not feeling strong, that there's a vulnerability about them. And the way that they're expressing it is that they voted to leave the European Union because they feel they'll be stronger on their own.
Half of them voted to leave.
Well, a bit more of those who voted. And I suppose that's the other thing about voting, that, not everybody turned out to vote. So I don't know how this European election will go. It'll be interesting. Their local elections in the first week of May will be very telling, both in the United Kingdom, especially in Northern Ireland, as to how the big parties are going to do, and that might indicate what will happen in the European Parliament elections. But I came to politics late. I wasn't in it from the very get-go, and I think that's a good thing. I would find I probably would be worn out at this stage if I was in it for my entire career. And it's one of the things that I think is important in politics, to get people in at different stages who come from different backgrounds. It's helpful.
You mentioned Nancy Pelosi earlier. She came to politics late.
Because I read a great profile of her, and it actually goes back to the first time I was on Question Time. Apparently I did a look with the eyes which was very unforgiving and brutal. Somebody must have said something I disapproved of, and apparently Nancy Pelosi has a similar look that her 5 children recognised, because my 4 children recognised it, and one of them got a message saying, beware, if you the look.
Right, but she went into politics late as well.
She did, and she was here in Ireland, and she's some woman. And I suppose what was lovely is she's very personable. And I think that comes from just being around a bit. She's very tough. She's very able. She was very passionate about the whole Irish issue and her support for Ireland in this difficulty around Brexit and future talks with the US about trade. She's been able to handle the President of the United States, Donald Trump, which is no mean achievement. He's a tough politician as well. I think he has great respect for her, because I think a lot of people are perhaps afraid of him, but she stood up to him. And I think that the more you stand up to people who have that kind of very large frame and very, very large ego, the more respect you'll gain. So I think she's a great mentor for women in politics generally. And also maybe political parties should look not just for young women, although that's really important, but also women like who have had 5 children, who've, you learn a lot when you have children going through life and all its troubles, and have a lot to give back at that stage. So I think she's, as I say, some woman for one woman. Did
you expect to see a picture of yourself on page 91 of the Mueller report?
I didn't, but thank God Twitter alerted me early and often, and I must get a full report, because I only saw it on my I think it was 2016, was it? I was part of a delegation of members of the European Parliament, and there's a picture of me, and I have to dig out all that entailed. I don't have you the picture there.
I don't have it here. I can show it to you afterwards. But I don't. I'll show it to you afterwards. But you're sitting at a table, but there's a few people then who were on the Trump campaign.
Yeah, that's right.
George
yes.
Papadopoulos.
Yeah,
he was on that committee.
He was. We were meeting lots of counterparts in the US. I think we were talking about counter-terrorism at the time. But my assistant and I were just talking last night that we have to dig out that picture and the Mueller report. I don't know which journalist put it up yesterday on Twitter, but I was going, OMG, how did I get to be there? But I'm not involved other than the pictures in the report. They don't mention me either way, and it's not my greatest claim to fame, I have to say, but it's there.
But do you think that is something at a European level, like the Mueller report primarily dealt with like the Russian intervention in the American election? We had the same concerns around Brexit. You talked about the various things that are happening in the world, and there are bad actors manipulating things. Is that something that at European level you're concerned about?
Oh yeah, it's a huge issue. I mean, there's been a lot of debate in the Parliament around this and resolutions passed. And I think because there is an explosion of social media that has got ahead of the regulator, and I don't know if we're ever going to be able to get ahead of the social media and all that it entails, or tracing back who's behind various things. But like political parties themselves use social media to twist and turn stories. So it's not as if there isn't already that capacity. Where it gets nasty is where outside actors try and influence the outcome of elections by very surreptitious means, and nobody knows what's going on behind platforms. So there is a lot of concern around European Parliament elections that could happen, and a lot of us are aware of it and kind of wise to it. But, you know, when we're out canvassing and campaigning, and there are other people in dark rooms and halls doing other stuff, not just about individuals, but about policy papers and political parties, it is very hard to get ahead of that movement where people are intent on twisting and distorting the debate. And that's why a lot of my colleagues in the UK are very concerned about what happened there with the referendum campaign. Obviously, the Mueller report, which I'll now look at and read with a tad more interest, is part of that as well. And they haven't given up on it's a bit like the report is there and there's a suggestion that the president is totally exonerated, but his opponents, his political opponents, do not agree. So I think that is going to run as well. But yeah, I think there's a big thing now around what is a democracy, who's influencing it, how do we make, is it ever pure? Because, you know, if people now are reading news feeds, not of newspapers used to, at least when you opened a page, you've got different opinions on the one page. If you're getting a news feed, you're getting the opinion that suits your perspective. And how are we going to have that wider, I suppose, critical analysis that people need? And we talk about this when I'm in schools. Like, you know, if you see something that, McGuinness did this in the Parliament, actually check it out, because it mightn't be true. I mean, there's a story about Greta Thunberg, that young climate activist who was in the European Parliament this week. She came to the Environment Committee. She was invited by the President. And there was a huge debate in the Conference of Presidents that I don't sit on, which is the groups. And there was a debate whether she should come to the plenary. And some groups felt, well, it's a bit too much to have her in the big chamber, but she should be invited to the Parliament. And then I was reading on social media that I had voted against her coming into the European Parliament, which is not true. Right. But that's out there. And when I met young students who were on the climate march recently, they said to me, why did you vote against? And I said, well, I didn't. I said, and that's why you need to be very careful about what you read on your news feed. But the one thing I would say, she is a 16-year-old, and she certainly has, you know, pushed this debate to another level. And I think it's been really unfair that somebody of 16, with her level of concern, because I felt she was really troubled personally about this whole climate debate and has taken a lot on her shoulders, and therefore we should make sure that she doesn't have to continue doing that. But going back to the key point, which is, what is truth, what is news, how do you interpret what's actually happening? And like I do tend to read reports from beginning to end. Because I remember when the Beef Tribunal, for example, and my brother was the chief witness in the Beef Tribunal, when it came out, I mean, the lines were given, so the report was never read. And I'm always conscious then that whoever's first out with the line, whether it's true or false, that's the story. And I think that's a worry for journalists as well, because then you're swept into that canal of, well, we're all going this way on it. And it's hard to kind of turn it back a bit. But it's not impossible to do it. And you can do that by directly engaging with people. And I do think that, you know, I will be a bit worn out after this election campaign, because it's been a busy 5 years. But if you are genuinely believe that democracy and the centre ground is a good place to be, like moderation is okay, you know, because extremes, in my view, do nothing for anybody, then you have to be where people are at, which is with them on the ground.
But it's become, as you said, it's become a sort of a boring point of view, the moderation, isn't it? Oh my God,
yeah. Well, I'm dead boring. I'm sure people think they'll probably fall asleep, but I'm not boring.
No, but that idea, but everybody, and you talk about people getting, you know, different opinions, and when you talk about Mueller, and what strikes me about what's going to happen in America now is they're going to spend 2 years arguing about whether he obstructed justice or not, and nobody's going to change their mind.
Absolutely. And you see, the thing about the moderation piece is it is a dull space to be in, but and I suppose my attraction to moderation has increased because I chair votes in the Parliament and I chair debates, and you can see where the extreme right and the extreme left, which are poles apart politically, they vote the same way, they argue the same way, they're against most things. They want to say this is the way things should be, without actually thinking, well, if we give a little on our definite position, we might actually get more people to come in and support it. But that's a very difficult message now to sell. Compromise, which is a key word in all parliaments globally, is actually now almost out of fashion. And that, you know, that's why we have a rise of independence more in Ireland. We don't have an extreme right, we have a rise in independence. And I respect people who run as independents. Marion Harkin, who's now not running for the European Parliament again, is a very strong independent MEP. But it allows you to be absolute, because you may never have to be responsible or in power to do anything about it. So I'm all for moderation. I'm a big pursuer of it in all things, because I see the problems where you don't have it. And I've seen and chaired debates which were pretty nasty and quite poisonous. And when you're sitting there, you know, okay, I'm sitting on this big podium and I'm not the biggest of individuals, and you have people, you know, pouring venom out across the chamber and then others reacting, because that's what happens. I'm glad we're doing it with words, but I can see why in the past it was done with weapons. And, you know, it's very easy as a politician to set one group against the other. And that's what we're doing now. I mean, I'm not doing it. I try and not do that. But there's a lot of that about the place, because you will get great oxygen for those type of strong views, but you cannot repair that then. It's very hard to bring people together. And I suppose there are leaders who are doing that right across Europe, across the world. So I hope it's just a phase we're going through, but I'm not so sure. And I think unless people really take their politics, you know, more seriously, and in Ireland we're good enough with the kind of political debate, because wherever I go people will engage with you, whether it's the chemist shop in Athlone recent, or in Mullingar recently, that the owner there that I was talking to, or somebody I met when I was having a bite to eat, that they do talk to you about stuff that matters to them, and they are interested to hear what you have to say. And I always say with people who have, you know, strong views and spit them out with fire, you know, they'll feed your anger. They will, because God Almighty, they're saying what you're thinking. But they'll feed nothing else. They won't feed a solution. They don't even want one. And I think that's what really, I mean, I do worry about that, not in the way that I don't sleep over it, but I actually think for my children and their children, you know, if that is to continue, that idea that we have it and nobody else can. And that's about migration, it's about climate, it's about all of those things that, while we're not doing enough and we're not doing it quick enough, at least the centre is trying very hard to move us in a direction where more people can come along on the journey, rather than those who on the margins, they see no other objective than fueling fear and anger. And I think it's rife, you know, it's not, we're not in a great place, I think, around the whole politics and democracy. I also think, and I talk to my own colleagues here in Dáil Éireann, you know, parliaments are not nice places to be at the moment.
Really?
No. I mean, kind of people think, oh, you have it easy and cushy jobs and all the rest of it. The amount of anxiety and tough issues we have to make decisions on, trying to do it in the best way possible, trying to get as much information as we can. You know, it is a lot to take on. At least in the European Parliament, we have 5-year terms to do that. And if you're interested in an area, you can actually make a difference. I think in the Dáil, for example, people aren't certain. They're you know, I imagine it's much tougher than the job I do, whatever party you're in, because the uncertainty of it, people wanting immediate actions. And that's why Europe, to some extent, it sets the narrative that mightn't happen in the member state for a few years, but it begins the discussion, whether it's reform of medical devices legislation or safety devices in cars, or all of these stuff that eventually come in and we wonder where did it all start. I think, any parliament at the moment, for those who are trying to be the moderates, the centre, if you like, the centre ground, centre right or centre left, but I think we have to keep keep focused on being that. The worst thing you could do is mimic, because people will vote, as you know, for the original, not the copy. And there is a sense in which there's a fraying around the edges of both the centre left and the centre right. People thinking, well, maybe if I jump further that way or that way, I'm more certain of being re-elected. And I think that's a bit of a danger, because certainly in the European Parliament you need people, whether it's the EPP, Socialists, the Liberal groups, to actually, have their differences but come together and vote so that we can make progress, rather than we can literally sabotage ideas and have total stalemate.
You mentioned your brother there. How tough a time was that when he was the witness at the tribunal and the report and the background to that?
It was a really difficult time, because I was a journalist. And I haven't really spoken about this much at all, and nor do I want to say too much about it. But I will say one thing, that my parents found it very difficult. My mother was deeply upset, because when you're a whistleblower, which he was, you become the focus of the story, not the story that you were actually talking about. And therefore, I'm quite conscious that when people say, oh, whistleblowers, people should do this, I think people should be very conscious that those who do that sometimes find themselves in very difficult places. So I did find it difficult. I think our family found it quite difficult, because it was the meat industry, a very tough place to be. The politics of it, how the report was actually announced. I wasn't involved in politics at the time, but I remember all of these things. And because I was perhaps part of it in terms of being in journalism, I felt very much for him, because he did become the story. We became the story. There were journalists outside my parents' house
and he
taking
was in Canada,
photographs.
was he?
That's right. He was living outside the country and has continued to live outside the country. But it was certainly, I suppose, he did the right thing for him and at that time. But I think anybody who does that does have consequences for themselves, which never actually go away. So it is a long time ago, actually, a long time ago. And I have a copy of the Beef Tribunal. I actually gave it to somebody recently and they haven't given it back. So I do want it back, whoever you are that I gave it to. But it was a bad time in Irish politics. I mean, lots of bad things happened then. There was lots of things covered up. So it does take people who are brave enough to do those sorts of things. But usually people who are whistleblowers don't think about the consequences for themselves. And he hadn't discussed it with us, so he did this, because he wanted, if you like, to do what he had to do. And Susan O'Keefe was the journalist. And of course, I would have known Susan O'Keefe at the time. But I remember, gosh, I actually can see the moment. Because Susan had just phoned me beforehand to say, by the way, he's on the programme. We weren't
He did a
fully
World in Action
tuned in.
interview.
He did a World in Action interview. And of course, I thought, well, he'd be on the programme, but he might be, eyes covered or voice, changed. No, he wasn't.
Okay.
There he was. Because he's a year older than me. There he was, full frame, World in Action. I couldn't sit down. I mean, I was going, oh my God. Because it was a brave thing to do. Brave thing to do. And it was explosive afterwards.
And do you think Ireland is a better place for whistleblowers now? Like, because we've had Maurice McCabe. No, he wasn't a better place for him during...
No, it wasn't. At all. I don't think anywhere is a good place for a whistleblower. I think people who feel wronged by the system, and there are still many others now who do, or see a wrong in the system, and who feel that they have to speak out, will forever bear a huge burden for so doing. And you mentioned Maurice McCabe, and there are others as well. But sometimes people feel they have to do something because they can't live with the consequences of not doing it. And I often would come across issues and I think, God, am I doing enough with this? Am I digging deep enough? Because it can be hard for politicians to actually get to where stories are at or what's behind something. And we've seen how stories can run for decades before we get to a place where actually, this person was speaking the truth and we need to do more about it. I wish there were ways of getting to that point quicker than through investigations and tribunals and sittings and all that go with it. Because I think what happens when, even during the Beef Tribunal and other tribunals, unless you're sitting there taking notes, people dip in and out and you don't get the full story. And the longer it goes on, the less interest people have in it. And then, as I go back to my point, when there's an announcement, he who is out first with the line twists the narrative because very few people read the full story.
I want to ask you something you said about Brexit again, just before we wrap up, about you think in October it'll still be, like there seems to be a sense of kind of quiet at the moment because things have been pushed back to October and there's a deadline. That's a bit far away at this stage, but you're not optimistic about things being resolved in October?
Well, we've been chatting it through just with colleagues in the Parliament, and I mean it's quiet at the moment because the House of Commons are in recess, and God knows they needed a break because if they didn't get out, there was really going to it would have been an inferno of upset and grief. So the break was helpful, but my concern is what is the political gain for the Labour Party in helping Theresa May, the Conservative leader? And I think raw politics will be at play unless the Labour Party can get something in their negotiations that guarantee them some of the things that they want from Brexit. And then you have to ask, how can the Prime Minister deliver that, given that she has Brexiteers who want her gone? So I think my view of this will be influenced by the results of the local elections in the United Kingdom, then the European Parliament elections, and I think it will go to that. I mean, some people say, oh no, it'll all be sorted and there won't be European Parliament elections and it'll be done and dusted. I don't believe that. I wish I could say that it would be that way. So then you have the problem of summertime, recess. You then have party conferences in the United Kingdom. Nothing happens then. And that's October. And
that tends to play to the base as well, doesn't it?
Well, absolutely. So you're thinking, God, this year is gone. October is it's nearly upon us in terms of a political calendar, and we're no closer to seeing any resolution. There are still people who believe that there will be a second referendum, and maybe the Labour Party will push that, a confirmatory referendum between the deal and remaining. But there are equally those who see Theresa May not surviving and a hard Brexiteer taking over the Conservative Party, which may, if you like, pull the Conservatives asunder, which was exactly what David Cameron, way back, remember him, tried to avoid. He wanted to knit them together beautifully, and that hasn't happened. So I'm not overly optimistic about the withdrawal agreement being ratified. We have to ratify it in the European Parliament. Europe has said, and we've all said this loud and clear, it's not for renegotiation. So what then? So what then? What is going to happen here?
But there's stories in Britain, like Andrea Leadsom said that Merkel is open to reopening the withdrawal agreement and stuff like that. Is that more fantasy thinking?
Well, remember that British diplomacy and indeed politicians are trying to find a crack in the unity of the European Union. There was an attempt for Ireland to be sort of, if you like, cornered off and said, well, it's an Irish problem. The rest of Europe want to do a deal, and if we can only just get over this small issue of the invisible border. So that has been tried and it has been tested, but it hasn't worked. So there is full solidarity. And we had the Prime Minister of Latvia, who actually was a former MEP, just recently appointed Prime Minister, with us in the Parliament. And he spoke to us in our group about, people around the council listen to the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, and what Leo says they all agree with. So there is full solidarity around it. But anything can happen. Politics is so uncertain in the United Kingdom. Could there be an early election even? So none of us know that. How do we respect the outcome of a referendum that people question, but not everybody? How will the British society ever be united again? And I think that's the biggest difficulty for anyone in politics in the United Kingdom. The divisions in British society are just awful. And I don't know, is there a bridge across that? I'm not so sure. And the rhetoric has been so harsh.
Do you think some sort of Brexit has to happen for that to be healed? Because, there is a school of thought. There's like Tory MEP, or MPs like Rory Stewart and people like that who say he was a Remainer, I think, but he says we need to leave if we're going to heal.
I think that I'm definitely in that camp, but I'm also conscious that the British MEPs that I work with who are of a different view say, oh, please don't say that, Mairead, we think we can remain. But sometimes, you know, when people vote to leave, and because it's been such a harsh debate, perhaps the UK needs to leave, but not close the door. So if you're a gentle leave, I mean, as I said recently on television, the danger for the hard Brexiteers is that they slam the door and catch their own fingers. And the trouble is, I don't want them catching our fingers as well and causing us all grief. But if I was in your job, if I was a journalist, I'd find it intriguing. I think because I'm in the job I'm in, I find it very disturbing.
Do you think a no deal is still a possibility? Absolutely.
Until the withdrawal agreement is ratified, a no deal remains the fallback position, because we've just switched the dates. And then there was debate about whether we should have given a shorter extension rather than this long extension, but the election, that came up in the middle of it. So we are where we are, literally. And while I wish it to be otherwise, I'm not convinced that if I'm re-elected to the European Parliament that we will not be grappling with Brexit into the end of this year, and who knows, maybe into the year after.
And you don't think there'll be any pressure put on Ireland around the single market if there is a no deal and there's no border?
I mean, that is the big problem. We want to protect the single market too. We have huge interests in that. And I would go back to the British commitment, because the Prime Minister has writ large that she will not allow return to any borders. So I think the trouble with those who think a no deal is the best possible and we won't need a border, what they don't realise is that if they crash out within 2 days, they're going to have to come back and discuss money, citizens' rights, and the Irish border. So whichever way this evolves, those issues have got to be fixed in order for us to move forward. And I hope they're fixed within the context of the withdrawal agreement and a transition where we discuss the future, rather than having a nasty crash out, a break in diplomacy and relationships, and then people having to find a way to knock on the door and say, I didn't mean it, can we have a chat? Because ultimately that's how this will be resolved, one way or the other.
Probably not the time to ask you this while you're in the middle of a campaign, but do you have ambitions in Irish politics again? Like, you ran in the 2009 election, presidency you thought about in 2011.
Yeah, was it 2007 I ran?
2007,
yeah, it was 2007. Yeah, God, I said, did I run twice? Oh my God, didn't plan that. No, I mean, I remember at the time Enda Kenny asked me to run in Louth, and I did, and I gave it my best shot, and I wasn't elected. But I remember sitting outside the count, and I think I was talking to Sean O'Rourke on the radio, and I was quite, easy about it. I tried and I didn't get elected. And in a way, I think the best thing happened out of that, because while it took me a while in the European Parliament to find my feet, I think I did find my feet. I was conscious that in the committees and groups that I were in, because I was a newbie, that you would be kind of, you get overlooked. There's a whole kind of language of politics that unless you kind of say, hello, I'm small, but I'm here, don't ignore me. So I was able to find my feet. I ran for office both in my political group, and to my surprise and theirs, I got elected. Then I got diselected the next time around. I ran for the Bureau of the Parliament, so I got one of the VP jobs. And then in the last 2.5 years, I was the first Vice President. I ran for President of Parliament. The Italians obviously were better organised, so he stole a march on me. And I work well with President Tajani. So I would have ambitions. In terms of national politics, not for the Dáil, no. I think that one has gone.
President?
Perhaps, who knows? I mean, Fine Gael didn't run a candidate this time around because we were supporting Michael D. Higgins. If there had been a contest, I would have put my name forward. I always say to people now, when I'm out campaigning, oh, I'm going to run for the presidency, I say when I'm 77. I think that's a good age to run for president.
Well, we'll have you back then when you're running for president. Mairead, look, that was wonderful. Thank you
very much.
Thank
Hope
you.
I'm alive. There's always that risk.
Well, that was Mairead McGuinness. Before we go, don't forget to subscribe to Ireland Unfiltered on all the usual channels. And if you can, and if you like the show, please write a review. We'll see you next time.